Okay, well, welcome back. Week two. So I hope you enjoyed the project using the cemetery data in Marblehead. Let's take a little look at maybe some of your findings. All right. I got something kind of like this when I calculated the different amounts. You probably got something close to this. All right, and again, you can't just use raw numbers. You have to use percentages, or else it's not going to to make too much sense. If you test, imagine if you're doing a COVID test or something. This is why we look at positivity rate, not just the number of cases. But if you do, if you test 100 people and you get two positives, and then you test 500 people and you get two more positives, does that mean that the rate is staying stable? No, obviously it means the rate is actually going down, because percentage wise, compared to the number of people you tested, the people tested positive is actually a smaller percent. So this is why comparing percents is essential. So if you convert it to percent, you get something a little bit like this. And what does this tell you? Well, one thing you'll notice is that there's no abrupt changes, right? That is when they're transitioning from the death's head to the cherub, and then from the cherub to the urn and willow. There's not a decade where it suddenly just stops. One style stops and then the other completely takes over. Right? That is, for the most part, we see gradual change. That is, there's kind of an introduction of a style. It gets more and more dominant, and then it starts to go out of fashion. And when you actually represent the percentages as bars, right? So here the thickness of the bar represents the percentage out of 100. This is a great way to visualize it. If you look at the percentages this way, what you see is the introduction, the dominance, and then the fading out. And you see that with all of these trends. Archaeologists and others call these curves battleship curves, because they kind of look like a battleship from above, with two pointy ends, an introduction, a dominance, and then a fading out. Well, you could see these kinds of trends throughout history and prehistory, and even in our own time, right? If you think of technologies, if you think of styles, right? Typically, a style will be introduced, it'll become more and more popular, and then as something else is introduced, it will slowly take over. The other thing will phase out. Right? So if you look, for example, at record players, I know vinyl LPs are coming back, becoming more and more popular. So 78s were the first technology for playing records, and then 33 and the thirds were introduced. They could fit more music on the side because it was only 33 and the third revolutions per minute versus 78 revolutions per minute. Right? So on the 78, you could fit about 5 minutes on each side. 33s, you could fit about a half hour or so. Right? Then they had 45. So you can see how over time, right, the 78s started to fade out, 33s became more dominant, 45s kind of took over, then 8 tracks, cassettes, CD-ROM, right? So that means if you found, let's say, a bunch of houses that had collapsed in Grand Rapids, and you wanted to date when they were last used, if you and you collected all the records, if you calculated the percentages of the different kinds of styles or different technology, afterwards you could actually put those houses in order from the oldest to the youngest. We're going to take a little look at how exactly you do something like that. You could think of the same thing with phone technology, right? In fact, when you think of the company AT&T, some of you might know that what that stands for is American Telephone and telegraph, because when the company was founded, they were transitioning from telegraph and the use of Morse code to telephones, right? So it's not that the telegraphs just disappeared overnight and were replaced by telephones. There's a transition. These transitions allow archaeologists to figure out older and younger sites, right? So here's looking at cell phones. You might remember some of these, right? The flip phone, the razor phone, right? So you could do the same thing. Let's say we were in an earthquake zone, and different classrooms throughout Grand Valley history collapsed with students' belongings in them, and those things were left and never kind of excavated. And archaeologists in the future find these different classrooms, and they count the number of different kinds of phones and calculate the percentages, right? They would be able to create a Battleship Curve, right? So this happens in many, many areas. So how does this actually work in practicality? Well, I have attached 2 Word documents where you can try this out on your own, and I'm going to explain it, right? But let's just say you decided to go out and survey some archaeological sites, and you collected pottery from each of these sites. And the different kinds of pottery, you just kind of labeled X, Y, and Z, and you represented them by different colors. You know, the sites that you looked at, you just numbered them 1 to 10 based on when you actually sampled them. You calculate the percentages of the different types of pottery in each site, right? Everything obviously has to add up to 100 in each site, but percentage-wise, how much of X, Y, or Z, right? And then you create those bars. Right, you can see here, here's a 100% bar, nothing there. Now you want to put the sites in order. Figure out what's the oldest site, what's the youngest site. Well, how do you do that? Well, I'm going to show you now. Let's take a look here. All right, so I have these Word documents with the Battleship Curve that you can see here. And you may have to zoom out a little bit so you can see all of the bars, right? But what you can do in the Word document is you can click on a bar and you can move it around. And what you're going to be trying to do is you're going to move these around, and you're going to try and put them in order so that they form a battleship curve, right? So that there is slow, gradual progression from one style to another. There's not jumps, right? Like you could see here, this is obviously not a battleship curve, because it gets smaller, then it disappears, then it comes back, right? That's not the way these things work. There's slow, gradual change. So why don't you try this one, right? You know, pause the video right now, open the Word document, try it, and then I have another one for you to do, and that's the file Battleship Curve 2. Okay, well, hopefully you got something close to the right answer. Again, here's the same idea. You can see you have to zoom out a little bit, right? But if you click on each of these, this one's a little bit more difficult, but you can start, you know, at either end and try and, you know, start matching things up. And then, you know, okay, you could see like, you know, here there's, you know, and sometimes what you might want to do is look and see where there's no overlap whatsoever, right? So you can see that there's some overlap between, you know, between the blue and the yellow, between the blue and the red and the yellow, right? All of these tend to overlap, whereas the other one, there were some times when there was no overlap whatsoever, right? But you know, play around with it, see if you know, you can start sort of matching things up, see if you can kind of get that, you know, gradual progression through time, you know, and see what you come up with. You may have to obviously change certain things around. Okay, and once you've done that and you get one master sequence, you could unpause the video, and I'm going to kind of go over the answers a little bit.